Hey there, friend. Richie G's on the move again, taking steps to clear the mind in a place where you never walk alone. Yeah, it's an open space filled with grace where everybody gets to know Jesus' name.
You know, there is this old saying in physics that nature abhors a vacuum.
Right.
And, well, if you have ever been part of any kind of human organization, you know that exact same rule applies to people.
Oh, absolutely. It applies everywhere.
Right. Like, think about a startup where the founders suddenly check out, or a volunteer committee where the chairperson just starts ghosting the meetings.
Yeah, the worst.
It is a universally stressful experience for everyone involved.
It really is. You can almost feel the collective anxiety in the room when that happens. Because when a designated leader becomes passive, systems naturally crave equilibrium. They will automatically correct themselves by pulling someone else into that vacuum.
Right, just to ensure the whole enterprise actually survives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody inevitably steps up.
And not necessarily because they wanted the promotion or, the stress.
Right. Simply because someone had to keep things moving.
Exactly. So I want you listening to keep that concept of the leadership vacuum at the front of your mind today. Because in this deep dive, we are exploring how this exact dynamic plays out in a very specific, historically rich context.
And that context is the Christian church.
Yes. Today, we are looking at source material that outlines a biblical framework for complementary gender roles within church leadership.
Which is just a fascinating blueprint to analyze. Because what we have in these texts is essentially a profound exploration of group dynamics.
Right.
It's about duty and how ancient religious structures were actively designed to operate and, well, sustain themselves.
Yeah, and before we get into the mechanisms of how this all works, I want to clearly set the stage for you listening right now.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, because our goal today is absolutely not to take a side in modern culture wars or, political debates. We all know this specific topic can be a massive lightning rod.
Oh, for sure. It's highly debated.
Right. So instead, what we are doing today is objectively unpacking the internal logic of these sources.
Just looking at what the text actually says.
Exactly. We are looking at how they balance male leadership with female spiritual gifts, examining the specific biblical examples they use to justify this, and exploring the mechanics of what they argue is the ideal structure for a healthy community.
Which is an incredibly valuable exercise, honestly, regardless of your own background or personal beliefs.
Right, because it's about organizational structures.
Exactly. Looking closely at how these historical frameworks define a healthy organizational ecosystem gives us a really interesting lens through which to view any kind of human structure.
So to understand how these sources suggest structuring a church, we really have to start with the root problem they are trying to solve.
The void.
Yes, the void. That brings us right back to that concept of the leadership vacuum. The text argues that when men are passive, whether that is in the structure of the family home or in the broader church congregation, it creates a genuine vacuum.
And that is the foundational premise of the entire argument here. The authors observe this recurring historical and practical issue, which is just a lack of active male engagement.
And when that happens, the sources point out that women frequently step in to lead.
They do.
But what I found really surprising about the text analysis here is the motivation it assigns to this dynamic.
How so?
Well, it does not frame women stepping up as some sort of, hostile takeover or a grab for power.
Oh, not at all. No. The framework is very clear that when women step into these leadership voids, they are almost always doing it with incredibly good intent.
Yeah, that stood out to me.
The driving force is a genuine love for God, a deep concern for their families, and a commitment to their communities.
Right. They see a gap and they fill it.
Exactly. They see a critical need going unmet, and they step into that gap to meet it.
But the tension in the text is that while the intent is admirable, this reactive dynamic is not their ideal blueprint.
No, it's seen as a symptom of a problem.
Right. And they point to a specific biblical text to explain why. A letter known as Ephesians 5, written in the 1st century. So what is the underlying logic here? How does this ancient letter define the male responsibility that is supposedly going unfulfilled?
Well, to understand Ephesians 5, we really have to look at the historical context. The text places a very weighty, specific responsibility on men to provide spiritual leadership.
Okay.
But we have to be incredibly careful with how we define leadership here, because the ancient text makes a radical distinction about what that actually looks like in practice.
Right, because when a modern listener hears male leadership in a traditional religion context, the immediate visual is usually, well, dominance.
Right, exactly.
We picture a CEO barking orders from the top of the corporate ladder, or like a drill sergeant demanding unquestioning obedience.
And that is exactly the model these sources explicitly reject.
Wait, really? They reject that?
Completely. Because in the first century Roman world, the cultural standard was the paterfamilias.
The paterfamilias.
Yeah, the oldest living male who held absolute, unquestioned, and sometimes literal life or death power over his entire household.
Wow.
It was a system built entirely on dominance. But the biblical text flips that completely upside down.
How so?
It defines this required male leadership as deeply loving, humble, and above all, sacrificial.
Interesting. So it changes the metaphor entirely.
Yes.
Instead of viewing leadership like being the boss who gets the corner office and all the perks, this framework treats leadership more like, I don't know, like being a load-bearing wall in a building.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a load-bearing wall isn't there to look down on the rest of the structure. It is designed to absorb the weight and the stress of the building so that the rest of the structure can stand freely and securely.
I like that. So this type of leadership is about absorbing the burden of responsibility.
Precisely.
It is caring for the spiritual well-being of the group and doing so at a direct cost to yourself.
Exactly. The framework presented here is that this leadership is supposed to be modeled directly after Christ's self-sacrificial love.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when the sources talk about a dangerous void forming in the church, they aren't talking about a lack of bosses. They are talking about a lack of men willing to be that load-bearing wall.
Got it. But if the expectation within this framework is this heavy, sacrificial male responsibility, how does the text say that impacts the other half of the congregation?
Well, that's the big question.
Right, because reading this, my immediate thought for you listening at home is a purely practical one.
Which is?
Does this blueprint imply that women inherently want to be led this way, rather than simply leading themselves?
It is a critical question.
Oh.
And if we look strictly at the framework these authors are building, their answer is a resounding yes.
Okay.
Within this specific paradigm, the authors assert that many women actually express a deep desire for this kind of loving spiritual headship from male leaders.
Interesting, because of the protection it offers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely because it is designed to be protective and supportive rather than restrictive.
Right, because theoretically, if the men are actually functioning as load-bearing walls, it creates a profoundly secure environment.
Exactly. And the sources use a very specific theological term for this interconnected dynamic. They call it complementarity.
Complementarity. Okay, so the idea that two distinct parts make a complete whole.
Yes.
But how does that translate from a dictionary definition into the actual day-to-day structure of a community?
Well, in this context, complementarity posits that men and women are designed with different roles that are meant to interlock.
Like puzzle pieces.
Right. It is an asymmetrical structure, certainly, but the text argues vehemently that it is not an unequal one in terms of human value or dignity.
Okay.
The authors explain that within marriage, and by extension the church, this dynamic is meant to mirror the cooperative relationship between Christ and the church.
So it is less about establishing a hierarchy of superiority where one group is deemed inherently smarter or more capable.
Right. Not about superiority at all.
And more about building a cooperative ecosystem.
That is the core mechanism. The ultimate goal of this dynamic, as stated by the sources, is mutual flourishing.
Mutual flourishing.
Yeah. Everyone is supposed to thrive when these specific complementary roles are embraced.
Now, mutual flourishing is a compelling concept.
It is.
But this is exactly where my organizational brain started throwing up red flags while reading the material.
Oh, I bet.
Because if mutual flourishing is truly the goal and we are not operating on the assumption that men are just naturally better at things,
Right.
what happens to the highly skilled women? Specifically, women who are naturally incredibly gifted teachers and leaders.
Yeah, it exposes a massive structural tension, doesn't it?
It really does, because in a modern corporate setting, if you cap someone's upward mobility based on an arbitrary metric, your top talent leaves.
They walk right out the door.
Exactly. So I had to wonder, Is every single instance of a woman teaching in this biblical framework viewed as a sign of male failure?
Like, is it always a bad thing?
Right. Is it always just a symptom of a vacuum being filled out of sheer desperation?
Well, the sources anticipate that exact pushback.
Oh, they do.
Yes. And they clarify the mechanism by bringing in a highly specific, very prominent biblical example.
Okay, who is it?
A woman named Priscilla.
Yes, Priscilla and Apollos. This story completely shifted my understanding of how the text's framework actually operates in practice.
That's a great example.
Break down who these people were for the listener.
Sure. So to give some crucial context, Priscilla and her husband Aquila were first-century Jewish Christians. They were tent makers by trade, and they traveled extensively with the Apostle Paul.
So they were big deals in the early church.
Deeply embedded in the early church's foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the text points to a specific moment where a man named Apollos,
Right.
who is this incredibly eloquent, highly educated, and prominent male speaker from Alexandria.
Okay.
He was publicly teaching theology that was slightly inaccurate.
So you have a highly educated male authority figure making a theological error in public.
Right, and what happens next is radical for the time.
What happens?
Priscilla and her husband pull Apollos aside and actively correct his theology. They teach him the accurate doctrine.
Which, in the patriarchal society of the ancient Roman Empire, a woman correcting a prominent male teacher's doctrine was, well, basically unheard of.
It was virtually unthinkable in standard Roman society.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight this narrative to illustrate a vital point. Not all female teaching is a sign of male passivity.
Okay, so it's not always about a vacuum.
Exactly. Priscilla wasn't filling a vacuum left by a lazy man. She was exercising a genuine, undeniable spiritual gift of teaching.
Okay, so how does the framework reconcile Priscilla's actions with the Ephesians 5 mandate for male leadership?
That's the tricky part.
Right, because what is the actual dividing line between a woman filling a void out of necessity and a woman exercising a genuine spiritual gift? Because those look very similar from the outside.
They do. The dividing line comes down to how the teaching operates within the broader ecosystem. The sources outline strict criteria for evaluating these situations. The test isn't just a blanket ban on women speaking.
What's the test, then?
The test is whether the teaching itself is scripturally sound, whether it is orderly, and whether it is edifying.
Edifying, meaning
Meaning it actively builds up the congregation.
orderly, sound, and edifying.
Yes.
How did Priscilla meet that standard?
Well, the authors argue that Priscilla's teaching was done in an orderly way because she did it alongside her husband Aquila.
Ah, I see.
It wasn't a subversion of the church's structural authority. It was a cooperative effort that brought accurate doctrine to Apollos and ultimately strengthened the entire early church movement.
Okay, that gives us a much sharper picture of the blueprint.
It does.
We have this stated mandate for sacrificial male leadership acting as the load-bearing walls, but we also have the acknowledged, celebrated reality of genuine female giftedness in teaching and correcting.
Both exist at the same time.
Which naturally brings up the question of implementation.
Yes, the how-to.
Right. How do the sources suggest a modern organization actually operationalize this balance?
Well, that is where the rubber meets the road. Because balancing those two mandates without causing deep friction or organizational burnout, it requires a very intentional, carefully engineered structure.
Because practically speaking, you don't want a system where people are constantly scrambling to plug holes in a sinking ship.
No, definitely not.
But you also don't want a system that stifles half of your most talented people.
Exactly. So the first practical step the text lays out for creating a healthy church ecosystem is proactive recruitment.
Proactive recruitment. Okay.
Right. A healthy church must actively raise up and train qualified men for specific primary leadership roles, namely elder boards and senior pastoral positions.
Because that prevents the vacuum from forming in the first place.
Precisely.
If you deliberately train men to take on that Ephesians 5 responsibility, you ensure the structure has its load-bearing walls.
That is the foundation. And if that primary leadership structure is solid, and more importantly, if it is operating with the sacrificial humility the text demands, rather than authoritarian dominance.
Right, the load-bearing wall, not the boss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That stabilizes the entire community. But as you pointed out, that is only half of the equation.
Right. If that is a foundation, how do the walls go up? How do they handle the gifted women without violating their interpretation of structural order?
This is where the concept of lateral lanes comes into play.
Lateral lanes.
Yeah. Simultaneously, the church must actively create dedicated space for gifted women to teach and lead. The sources are emphatic that these spiritual gifts are meant to be released for the benefit of the community, not suppressed or hidden away.
But the mechanism of where and how they teach is highly specific, right?
Very specific. The text argues that this teaching should happen in appropriate structural contexts.
Like what?
It lists avenues like women's ministries, deep theological Bible studies, and specialized classes as the proper venues.
Okay, I see the logic they are using here. It is about creating dedicated lateral channels for that giftedness.
Yes.
It allows a woman with a profound gift for teaching to fully exercise that skill and build up the community.
Exactly.
But because it operates under the overarching headship of the elder board, it doesn't violate their interpretation of biblical hierarchy.
Right.
It creates a lateral lane for impact rather than a vertical ladder for organizational authority.
That perfectly describes the mechanism the authors are advocating for. And it leads directly to what the text considers the ultimate metric for evaluating a successful church structure.
Okay, how do they define success? What's the metric?
The ultimate test of this system's health isn't based on a rigid legalistic checklist of who is doing what on paper.
Okay.
The metric is the fruit it produces. Does the teaching and the structure as a whole build up the church in truth and love?
So we are back to mutual flourishing.
Always. The text argues that when men actually step up and lead with genuine humility, love, and diligence, it creates a profoundly secure space for the whole body to operate.
That makes sense.
And crucially, the sources note the psychological benefit of this. A healthy complementarian structure actually relieves women from the immense, exhausting pressure of having to constantly fill leadership vacuums.
Oh, wow. Which makes total sense from a burnout perspective.
Absolutely.
If you are constantly doing a job you weren't equipped or hired to do simply because no one else will step up, well, you are going to burn out rapidly.
And your resentment will skyrocket.
Exactly. But if you are in a role that fits your actual skills, supported by a leadership team that absorbs the heavy structural burdens, you have the freedom to actually thrive.
It is a really profound observation on the reality of group dynamics, wrapped in a deep theological framework. The underlying philosophy here is that true, properly aligned order actually brings freedom rather than restriction.
Well, let's pull back and look at the whole picture we've mapped out today.
Yeah.
What these sources are ultimately arguing for is a paradigm shift.
Very much so.
They want to move the conversation past the bitter, modern cultural battles over gender roles and return to the core mechanisms of this ancient biblical text: sound doctrine, structural order, and sacrificial love.
That is the central thesis of the material.
Right, and translating that into practical action, according to this blueprint, means actively encouraging men to step out of passivity and into sacrificial leadership roles. It means absolutely refusing to shame or diminish the women who have faithfully served and held things together when those painful leadership voids existed.
Exactly.
And it means deliberately designing structural lanes to release gifted women to teach within the bounds of what they view as biblical order.
The authors conclude that when all of those elements are functioning simultaneously, the church becomes vastly healthier, more resilient, and more effective at its core mission.
And for you listening, whether you are actively involved in a church congregation or you are just someone fascinated by the mechanics of organizational structures, there is a tremendous amount to chew on here.
Oh, absolutely.
Watching how ancient texts wrestled with the complexities of community roles, the delegation of duty, and the necessity of mutual support, it is just a timeless study in human group dynamics.
It really is.
We are fundamentally always trying to figure out how to work together without destroying each other.
It is the eternal human puzzle. And looking at this specific ancient blueprint raises a really provocative question to walk away with.
Oh, lay it on us. Where do we go from here?
Well, if the ultimate goal of this complementarian structure is truly mutual flourishing, and if leadership is defined by being a load-bearing wall of self-sacrificial love, how might our modern, completely secular organizations change if they adopted that?
Oh, wow.
What would a corporate environment look like if its leadership hierarchies were defined entirely by mutual service and taking on the burdens of the team, rather than just accumulating authority, status, and power?
That is a wild thought. That would require a complete teardown and rebuild of the corporate world.
It really would.
Because nature might abhor a vacuum, but maybe the solution isn't just rushing to fill it with whoever happens to be standing nearby, scrambling to survive another fiscal quarter.
Right.
Maybe the actual goal is to build an organizational structure where that vacuum never has the chance to form in the first place, because every single person is exactly where they were designed to be, pouring themselves out for the benefit of the person next to them.
Exactly.
That is definitely something to think about the next time you are sitting in a staff meeting. Until next time, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
When the men grow silent in the home, hearts grow weary, families feel alone. But a husband, loving like the Lord, lays his life down with a two-edged sword. Not with power, not with pride or shame, but with mercy calling out her name. When men lead well, the whole house stands. Women flourish underneath God's plan. Love and order, sacrificial grace creates the space for every gift and place. Women step in with a faithful heart, filling voids when leadership departs. With good intent they teach and pray and serve, yet the deepest longing is to be preserved. Not because the calling isn't theirs, but because His order shows He cares. When men lead well, the whole house stands. Women flourish underneath God's plan. Love and order, sacrificial grace creates the space for every gift and place. Like Christ who gave Himself upon the tree, husbands love so wives are truly free. No domination, no empty throne. Together they reflect the Holy One. When men lead well, the church will rise. Every voice joins in under open skies. Love and order, edification's call brings the body to the feet of Christ. Our all. When men lead well, the whole house stands. When men lead well, the whole house stands. Flourish together in His hands.